Okay. My name is Wray. I'm going to tell you what God has done in a life that I threw away. 7 months I had spent in prison, in jail. There's a big difference between jail and prison. The Bible tells us about the God of this world, or the prince of this world. And when you don't know God, you don't look at it as you're ignoring Him or you're not following the Lord. I always believed in a Creator, but I knew nothing about Him. So I just thought, yes, there's a Creator. I never believed in evolution, but that's all I could do with it. There was no more information to act on. In my mind, I wasn't ignoring God. It's just He's there, and I don't know anything else about Him. My grandfather escaped from jail in Virginia around the turn of the 19th century and rode a horse to North Carolina. In his mind, he wanted to begin a new life. But it was his plan, it wasn't God's plan. So he went right back into being an alcoholic and a wife beater. My father was born in 1929, led his life the same way his father did. I was born in 1954. When I was born, my father was in prison for an armed robbery. During my childhood, I didn't really know my father. He would come home for 6 months and go back again, and come home for a year and go back again, and he did a life on the installment plan. So I began playing sports and knowing nothing about my father except people would act differently towards me. I know now that my father was well known. His name was always in the paper, and people knew this, and they will treat children differently. When my father was at home during my teenage years, he began to teach me criminal activity that would benefit him. He told my brother and I once that you can have half of all you can steal. And I was too much of an entrepreneur to feel like half of all I can steal is a good deal. So I got to know his people in private, and I could have 100% of what I produced, not half. And that didn't go well with my father, so he didn't trust me. So my father and I remained at a distance. He never had a lot to do with me. He was a wife beater. At least once a year, he would beat my mother unconscious. When I became 17, 18 years old, he was a little bit threatened by me being around. I began to carry weapons of all kinds. My father was a very big man, but in my eyes, he was a coward. I never saw him confront anyone, even my size. It was always my mother. Now, he acted the tough guy in the neighborhood, and people thought he was certainly, being the criminal that he was, they thought he was a tough guy, but I continued to learn from him and develop my own methods. We were dirt poor. We were the poorest people in the city, and so I just wanted to make money. I had no desire to hurt anyone, but I did have a big desire to make money. In 1987, after I was 32 years old, and the course of my life had, in my eyes, had been successful. I had made a lot of money, but I had gotten married and felt I wanted to go down a different road before my luck ran out. I bought a convenience store. I bought a pickup truck to pick up and deliver things. This pickup truck had a broken antenna, and the only station I could pick up was a Christian station. And every day when I would leave work at 6 p.m., I heard Chuck Swindoll on the radio, and I didn't know who he was. I didn't know he was a pastor because he wasn't screaming and yelling. He was just telling a story. It was about King David. I didn't know who King David was. I'd heard of him, but yet not know who he was. So I enjoyed the story, and the program would last for the drive home. Then the next day, the story would continue. By the third day, I got home before the program was over, and the kids ran out of the house and wanted me to come outside and play with them. And I said, hold on a minute, I want to finish listening to this story. By then, I knew this guy was a pastor. A police officer I knew invited me to the church that he went to, which was very unusual. I'd never known an honest police officer. In our county, they were very crooked. I watched my father pay them when I was younger. So I went. The type of church that it was did not give me the message of what I was trying to hear. I didn't know what I wanted to hear. I didn't know why I was there, but I wasn't hearing it. Well, it was only the next week when my life choices had came to an end, and the police came to get me, and there was no bond. I couldn't get out. I couldn't go home. The first day in jail, I knew that this is more serious than anything else. I had been arrested many times, and I always thought it was an inconvenience. I get a lawyer and you take care of it. This was as serious as it could be. And there was a Gideon's New Testament in the jail cell. And for lack of anything else, I started reading. I read the book of John. And I didn't want to go to another book because I didn't know what was in it. And I knew what was in the book of John, and I knew it was the truth. I had never heard that before. But I knew it was true. So the third morning, I asked God to forgive me. And I knew what I was in there for was not something that was going to end quickly. So I had two attorneys, a private detective, a woman to give advice on how to dress. All of this cost almost all of that illegal money I had made. I was found guilty. The judge sentenced me to natural life. This was in May of 1989. And by this time, the 7 months I had spent in prison, in jail, there's a big difference between jail and prison. I had learned a lot about God, but what I was arrested for had happened years earlier. So after 7 months in jail, I was sentenced to natural life. I was sent to Raleigh, North Carolina Central Prison, the only maximum security prison in the state. I was told that I couldn't leave there for 2.5 years. But I knew that God was with me. So the Lord always blessed me wherever I was. And my attorney continued to tell me that he was working on the appeal. And I told people, at one point, I was in a private room and I was in charge of feeding the officers, and they had to pay to eat. And they would get to know me and they would ask questions, and I would tell them, this life sentence is coming off. And I had full confidence. Just wait. You'll see. It'll take time, but it'll happen. The North Carolina Supreme Court voted 7-0 to overturn my conviction because of the illegal activity that went on in the courtroom. I had been riding a pen pal in Vietnam for 3 years. Never any intention to go there, just something to do. It would take 6 weeks to write a letter to go there and come back, just a hobby. After a year of being out and working every day and working 15, 16 hours a day, I decided I'll check into what would it take to go to Vietnam and what would it take to marry this girl if I decided to do that. So I had sent her a Bible just to see how she would react to it. I didn't say anything, and she reacted in the way that I had hoped. After 4 years, I went to Vietnam and met her. I married her the 10th day that I was there. That was January 19th, 2000. 7 months later, she comes to the United States. We went to a Baptist Vietnamese church where she could hear the word in her own language. She had no education. Poor people in Vietnam can't go to school. They don't have any money. School is not free. She was in the United States for 13 years. Her father became ill. She went back to Vietnam to take care of her father. By the time he died in early 2014, I was making preliminary plans to sell everything that we owned. And we had already begun purchasing land in Vietnam to have a mission, a church in Vietnam. She wanted to come back to the U.S. and I said, we don't need that expense. I'm making preparations to come there. She said, well, then we need to build a house because it's uncomfortable in the situation I'm in here. 2014, we built our home in Vietnam. Vietnam is a very poor country, lacking many things that we have here. And God put it in our heart to go to Vietnam and to help children there. So in 2015, I sold everything that we owned and I moved to Vietnam. And since 2015, we have had a church. We travel and do missions in the poorest part of the country. We talk to children in the street. There's children as young as 5 years old walking the street by themselves trying to make money. A young teacher came to my home and asked me would I teach a Bible study for teachers. That's illegal. Teachers must be a member of the Communist Party, and they're not allowed to be involved in religion, so we had to do it in secret. After doing this for a few months, I get my foot in the door into the public school system to teach children speaking and listening. I've been doing that for over 14 months. I've baptized 4 students secretively, and we continue to reach more. I teach English through the Bible stories, and I can't talk about them being Bible stories, but when the children have questions, then I answer their questions, and that leads to them knowing God and salvation and baptism. We've adopted 2 children. We have 2 more infants that we take care of. That we haven't adopted them, but they're a 6-month-old boy and a 1-year-old girl. We take care of them because they have no parents. We have a 16-year-old boy living in the church. He's a good kid with no parents, working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, with nowhere to go after work. Our church has reached a lot of people, but this is what the Bible talks about, that Jesus came for the sick. The sick are people who are sinners that know they are sinners when they hear the truth. They need a Savior. God loves poor people, handicapped people. He loves sinners. But this is what God can do with someone who believes in Him and will look to Him and trust to Him, ask for His help. And I hope that this message would touch someone. There's no one who is too bad for God to forgive you. In fact, you're the very one that He came for. Thank you for your time, and God bless everyone.